Hey, everybody. Look, anybody who's been on these calls before has probably seen my face. For those of you that haven't, just to be clear, I'm a real estate investor. I don't work for Royal Legal. I, have been working real estate exclusively since 2010. I've got some experience. I've got some answers. I've definitely got some opinions. Some of the things I talk about, look, they worked for me. And some of the things didn't work for me, but each and every one of us has different backgrounds and different things that we excel at. So, I've got a general outline of things that we can talk about. If I'm more than happy to, expand on certain things, or if there's less interest, move away from some things. But if something is, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I would not find it rude, and actually I'd find it beneficial if you hear something you like, either put it in the chat or actually just stop me from talking, and I'm happy to give you guys more detail. So kind of just as a general outline of some of the things I was considering is kind of give you a very brief history of my life before real estate, why, and then kind of like why I wanted to get into real estate, how I got into it, kind of how that evolved, and really what I recommend to others that are either starting out or are already in it. And we can have a kind of a fluid discussion going that way. How does that sound? Okay.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Awesome.
All right. Well, okay. So, look, before I got into real estate, like I grew up in LA. I, was born and raised there, and got my undergraduate degree in business. I went to UC Riverside. When I got out of college, I really wanted to get in the pharmaceutical industry. I just love the idea of making, decent income, but not having necessarily go into an office. And I can tell you that I looked way younger than my age at the time. And back then, the pharmaceutical industry basically predominantly hired, pharmacists and people with MBAs. And I just interviewed with dozens of companies. And if I could get anywhere, it was basically, hey, you need some sales experience. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So I did some hard-nosed door-to-door knocking, selling long distance phone sales and 800 numbers to small and medium-sized businesses. Did that right out of college for about 6 months. It was dreadful. You've been signed out because your account is, there we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Everybody
yes.
good?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
I got some weird Zoom thing that popped up on my account here, so just want to make sure I wasn't talking to myself here. So I did some hard-nosed sales. It was horrible, made good money, but just hated it. But I always had that goal in mind that I'm going to do this and still continue to interview in the pharmaceutical industry. After about 6 months, I got my first pharma job. Look, I can go into detail about that, but I did that for over about a decade and a half. Always wanted to start my own business, but had no clue of what that would look like and what that would entail. And, near around 2010, just before that, I was working for Johnson & Johnson. Actually, I worked for them for the majority of the time I was in pharma, and they paid 100%. They would pay 100% for people to continue their education. I ended up getting my MBA. They paid 100% for that. That was well over 100 grand that I didn't have to pay for. But it really opened my eyes to, even though I really enjoyed my job, in order to move up, I would have had to move to Jersey, and that was just not a terrific. It just wasn't an interest of mine. Nothing on fault of Jersey. I just loved living in California. So I started thinking about, what are potential ways, businesses that I could start. And this was right around 2010. As we all know, real estate completely blew up in 2008. And I thought, what a great opportunity to get in when prices are low. And a lot of people were really trying to dissuade me from doing this. And I think, well, actually, I know a lot of them were saying that based off their own personal experiences because they own their own house or they were in real estate and their whole thing, blew up on them. But I had to remind them, if you're familiar with Rothschild, one of a very successful, entrepreneur, he says the best time to buy is when there's blood in the streets, when there's lots of opportunity out there. So how I started was kind of, I talk to a lot of people about real estate, and I do this today. I talk to anybody who's willing to listen because I just love it and I have so much fun with it. But so I was talking to a friend of mine who was the husband of somebody I went to college with, and he was a realtor. And he said, I know I heard you were interested in real estate. Why don't you go to this seminar? And I went to this seminar, and I'm not going to lie to you guys. It didn't take long for me to be in that seminar, realize that this was like oh my God, this is listen to a fire hose worth of information. And, like I have my own opinions on those things. Some people really flourish from them. A lot of people spend money on things that they never recover. And it was very much a go to the back of the room and sign up for this, $20,000 in coaching and stuff. That didn't necessarily appeal to me. But what it did do is it made me look around the room and kind of just look into myself and say, what is it that I have that maybe other people in the room, they have their own skills and I have my own skills. What skills maybe do I have that they don't? And one of the things that I really realized is that I've got really good access to capital. I've saved money my whole life. I have other friends that are successful. So if there's a good investment to be had, I have good access to capital. And one of the people, or two of the people that were teaching, during this seminar, had this thing where they were buying a lot of homes through short sales and foreclosures, and then immediately reselling them to an end buyer. I understood their business model, and that business model, without going to tremendous detail, required capital, and for a very short period of time. And I understood it, and I went up and I offered, and I said, look, I see what you're doing. I like it. If you ever need funding for it, let me know. And they were very cordial, and they said, hey, I appreciate that. We have a guy who work with, and we're loyal to him. And so a couple of weeks went by, and I actually got a call from them because their guy completely flaked out on them. And they had a deal on the table, the house they were closing on, and needed funding within a very, very short period of time. Now, luck would have it, this was a property that was only a few miles from my house. So it was very easy for me to drive the property. It was not just some facade sitting on stilts. It was clearly a nice property. How much they would need to close was significantly less than what the property was worth. I could see that. I would not be sending them the money directly. It would go to an escrow company. So I literally went to the escrow company and I over interviewed everybody in there. I mean, I look back and God, they must have thought I was so annoying. But and then eventually I realized that, if I wire money to this escrow company and anybody decides to wire to the Bahamas or whatever, there was large underwriting companies that guaranteed I would get my money back. So long story short, I did the deal. I wired, let's see, what was it? Roughly, it was right around $400,000 over. And I got it back the next day and got 1.5 points. So made $6,000 overnight. I'm like, wow, that was fun. And that developed trust. These people were doing a couple dozen deals a month. I didn't have a ton of capital, but because I was in and out of the deal so quickly, I could rinse and repeat with the same, bundle of money. And again, I can go into a lot more detail of what that business model was. But I can tell you the result was that I got introduced to a lot of, because it was in and out, because it was very quick, I could do it not just with properties that was down the street from me, but I got introduced to a lot of other properties in California, Arizona, Florida, all around the country, different places to do this, and made different connections. Now, eventually that business model worked really well around that time period because, well, frankly, because there were so many short sales and foreclosures. Once that started to dissipate, I could see the writing on the wall that this business model wasn't going to last. And what eventually happened is, instead of getting my money back the next day, it would have to be like 2 days, 3 days, a week, 2 weeks, because the banks were starting to put deed restrictions on the resale of the property. A lot of investors, and I mean, these are the people that provide money to the banks, really didn't like it that they were asked to take a haircut on the loan that they were giving to the bank. And that people, like the people that I was loaning money to, were then reselling it in a very short period of time for more money than what that original investor had given to the bank. So the banks put deed restrictions on how quickly you could resell a property. So this is called transactional funding. What I was doing, do you guys hear a lot of background noise on my side, or is the noise cancellation right now? We're good?
I don't hear
Okay.
any background noise.
Okay, good. I've got a vacuum right behind me, the housekeeper today. So I apologize for that. If you do hear it, it sounds like you don't. So that turned into more fix and flip funding rather than transactional funding, which increased my risk because now it wasn't end buyer sitting in my escrow before I even spent my money. It's just a pure arbitrage play. So I guess it kind of brings me to my first point, guys, is that it's really important when you start a real estate business or any business for that matter, even if it's very successful, is to really pay attention to the tea leaves and what you see happening into the future. When I first got into the business, I asked a lot of people who were doing the thing that I wanted to do, transactional funding, for help and advice. The vast majority of them told me, well, just didn't give me the time of day. And one of the guys who did, I ended up doing a lot of deals with him. We made each other, good amount of money. But if I'm being frank, he didn't read the tea leaves and he continued to do the same thing and his business got smaller and smaller and he didn't evolve into other aspects of real estate. I'm glad that I did because had I stayed in that business model, it would be defunct today. So first piece of advice is always kind of look beyond just what you're doing and make sure that you're evolving and changing based on what the market, dictates. So I guess I could talk a little more about why I chose real estate. Look, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm one of those, I find most people involved in real estate tend to be very risk adverse, and that's the only kind of asset that they feel comfortable investing in. I'm one of those kind of guys that look, real estate's there because I find it's a good way to make money. But if somebody tells me of another way that I can do better, I'll ditch real estate. I'm just going to be honest with you. And for the longest time for me, it was working a W-2 job, living within my means, and using that excess capital to invest in the stock market. And that's how I made my money originally, is had a decent, well, actually a more than decent job, working as a pharma rep. They gave me a company car. So one of the bigger expenses of, owning and paying a car payment just wasn't something I had to pay for. And a lot of other expenses, involved in running a business, I didn't have to pay for because pharma, paid me a very decent salary and decent bonuses. And I saved. So a lot of my friends, growing up, basically spend a lot more money to live a certain lifestyle. And I fortunately had the discipline to still have a good life, take vacations, but spend your money on things that are meaningful, on experiences, on vacations, not on, look, some things are just more frivolous, and some things are frivolous, give you joy. But try to be, to live below your means. It's something that is a mantra that I live by. Delayed gratification. And because I did that, it made transitioning over to real estate much, much easier. And what I did, when I said the transactional funding, and it's because like one of the first questions I had is like, hey, Chris, I mean, that worked for you. That first deal you said you have, you loaned 400 grand. I don't have 400 grand. And I get it. Not everybody does. But remember that the people I loaned the 400 grand didn't have 400 grand, and they made more money on the deal than I did. All the businesses that I get into, the capital I have does the vast majority of the heavy lifting. But the money into the partner and some of the other businesses, and we'll talk about, they didn't. When I eventually talked about my landlord business, the main guy that I invested in was in his 20s. And he took a lot of risks with his time, but my risk was with my capital. And if I'm just going to be extremely blunt, I mean, he became a multimillionaire in his 20s and without using any of his own money. So I have a lot of ways that I can, talk about the most efficient ways to use capital, but I'm also very sensitive to the fact that a lot of people don't have it. And my point will always be that there's always somebody else on the other side that's using something. Well, they're using me. And using is a bad word, but they're using my capital to work hard, to come up with a good deal, and to make money that way. I also really recommend that a lot of the deals that I did, and now with that transactional funding, that got me introduced to a lot of other people. I did, a few dozen deals in Florida, and this title agent who I'd done, a number of deals with, knew these two guys that were fix and flipping in Florida, and their money partner, which I think was like one of their uncles, kind of flaked on them, and they had a deal on the table that needed help. And since I had done a number of deals with this title agent, and this title agent had done a number of deals with these fix and flip guys, we connected. And that was, back in around 2011, 2012. And we did a number of deals together, and I still do flips with them now, anywhere from 5 to 20 flips at a time. I do with these two guys in Tampa. And guys, I live here in California. There's so much that I can do and be able to do that business today that, 20 odd years ago that was impossible. There's so much due diligence that you can do over the internet now. There's ways to protect yourself. I mean, when I first did my first few deals with those guys in Florida, we did it all under my own entity. So my entity purchased the property, and they provided the service to improve the property. And if they didn't live up to their standards, I didn't have to go through some foreclosure process or anything like that. So that made me feel comfortable. Now that took huge trust on their part. I mean, I was the money guy. I was now the owner of the property. I could have undermined them. But that's always a risk you're going to have when you have partners is, it takes time to develop that trust. I can certainly tell you stories that were phenomenal. I certainly have stories where partnerships did not work out, but it usually happens near the beginning if somebody's going to do something that's relatively shady. And one of my favorite things to do is, whenever you start with a partner, look, I was loaning out, good sums of money. So, I mean, there are a lot of times when I'll have people ask them if they're okay with me running a criminal background check and a credit check. And most people are receptive to it. But before I do that, I will often ask, look, I appreciate you allowing me to run this, but before I do, is there anything you want to tell me? And I had this one guy, for instance, he said, no, there's nothing I have to tell you. And we ended up, moving forward with the deal was already in place. I was about, to send the money into, to escrow, but then, last minute, I kind of got lazy, I'll be honest. And I didn't, last minute, I, asked for about the criminal background check and I did it. And it wasn't anything major, but some things came up in that report. And I brought this to his attention and he kind of, just started using just bad excuses and I told him, look, we're trying to develop trust here from the beginning. And he made some excuses, but in the end, he started making the deal more and more sweet in my direction. And it was hard for me not to move forward. So I started moving forward with it. And long story short, I'd already told him I'd pull out, and then we sweeten the deal. But what I found out later was there was another hard money lender that called me up and said, hey, Chris, I know we always wanted to work together. I got an in on this property. And I want to see if you want to co-invest with me on this. It was the same property. He was shopping the deal out to other people. But even after he had already signed agreements with me. So you can see how just asking some of these questions beforehand, I should have followed my gut even more, but luckily it was found out that he was doing even more shady things. And in the end, both of us decided not to invest with this guy. And he lost out on that deal. But because of that, the realtor, this was to buy a house to fix and flip. The realtor on that deal called me up and said, hey, look, this deal is still in place. It was a short sale property. If you're still willing to, would you consider, doing it yourself? And why not? So I didn't feel an obligation to, but I did feel that I would call the guy and tell them, and just to let him know I was doing, not to ask for his blessing, but to let him know I was doing that. And I called him up and he understood, and he didn't like it, but he was okay with it. And I went through with the deal, and that was a relationship I developed with a realtor who was very good at finding short sale properties. And I guess there's a couple of different lessons there, but one is very often follow your gut. And if somebody gives you bad vibes, it's often not worth investing in the deal. Two, there's often ways to salvage the deals too. And, and this goes for any industry, guys. And I will tell you, the vast majority of people and partners that I got because somebody else screwed up. And I'm putting a big fat pause there. Somebody else screwed up and I got into the deal. And the number one reason I still had most of these partners well over a decade later is because I'm predictable. When you can become predictable to partners, you can become indispensable. In a lot of cases, I'm not the least expensive way to go. for people with capital. But I'm the most flexible, and if I say I'm going to commit to a deal, I commit to a deal. Unless you're like that last guy and you lie to me. You lie to me, it's not going to work. So if you can become indispensable, you can become predictable, you're going to go really far. And I'm sure everybody here can agree with me on this. If you work your butt off to create a deal, to find a deal, one of the worst things that can happen is for you to have everything lined up and you go to purchase and your funding falls apart. There's very few things that I can see that are worse because you put so much effort into it and then it falls apart because of funding. So I provide that predictability for a lot of real estate investors. So if you can become, like I said, predictable and reliable, it goes very, very far. I kind of want to talk a
Chris?
little bit about, yeah. Do you have a question?
Well, I put in the chat, sorry, I'm a dummy, but what exactly is transactional funding? And maybe I'm the only one
Sure.
that has that question. Thanks.
No, I could explain it in a nutshell. It's not the easiest thing to explain, and it's not necessarily around as much anymore. But I'll try to make it as simple. And let's go with like an A to B, B to C model. So C is usually the easiest to explain. That's an end buyer who's willing to buy a house the normal way. A is okay, so it's an A to B purchase. So you're purchasing B is buying from A, and then B is reselling to C. So A would be the homeowner / bank who owns a property that's worth less than the loan they have against it. So this is typically a short sale situation. B comes along and is an investor and says to A, the homeowner, hey, look, I know the situation you're in. Rather than go into a foreclosure, how about I negotiate on your behalf to purchase your home at a discount? And you get, and look, the benefit to me is I get a home at a discount. The benefit to you is you get to walk away from this. It doesn't hurt your credit as much as a foreclosure. And in a few years, your credit will improve to enough to where you can either buy a house again, or it's not as much of a problem for you. So they negotiate that, and it's a long process. So B, who's the investor, is now negotiating with the bank, which can take 6 months, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And while they're negotiating with the bank, they're searching for end buyers for that property. So now that, so let's say it goes according to plan. They negotiate with the bank to purchase it for less than the mortgage. And if you're lucky, the market's kind of appreciated too, so you could sell it for a higher amount as well. But in the end, what happens is that B, the investor, purchases the property from the homeowner / bank, and then immediately resells it to an end buyer. So A to B, homeowner to investor, B to C, investor to end buyer. And then it's just arbitrage. What is the amount that's made in the middle? Now, when this first started out, and what investors would do is they would just have money from the end buyer in escrow and use that money to pay off the bank and have arbitrage. Unfortunately, like a lot of things, there was some fraud, and it became law that you had to have 2 distinct transactions. That's why the A to B, B to C, and 2 different closes. Now, because it had to be 2 different closes, you had to come up with what's called wet funds. You, as the investor, had to purchase that property before you could then resell, even though it's very often happened in the same day. And that's where transactional funding comes in, is that I promise to provide that funding to that investor who purchased that property to then immediately resell it to others. And I charge a fee for that. Back then, it was like about 1.5 points. So that guy needed 400 grand. I wired in 400 grand, and then I got paid 406 back because I was 1.5 points. So now, for me, one of the best parts about it was that end buyer's money would be sitting in escrow for that B2C before my money went in for the AB. So it couldn't have been a more pure arbitrage play because I already knew the money was there to repurchase. And in some cases, like I said, it would happen the same day that you would close on the first part of it and then resell on the second. Now, like I mentioned, that happened, it was for a few years, and then the bank started putting deed restrictions and all these different rules. And it became that you had to very often improve the property before you could resell it. So that evolved into other businesses.
Chris, that was really great because even I understood your explanation and it sounds like a great play, but I have to ask, I wonder with, we keep hearing that there's going to be a flood of foreclosures hitting the market. Does today's scenario make this a timely play once again?
Yeah, that's a good question. Possibly. Possibly. The difference between potentially now and beforehand is that before 2008, there were a lot of people that were getting loans that absolutely should not have. I mean, if you could fog a mirror, you could get a loan. I'm not saying that's just not happening as much today as it was in the past. I mean, you had bus drivers, and I don't belittle anybody and what they do, but buying $800,000 homes. I mean, this is not an exaggeration. I mean, there were just people that just thought the market was go up and up and they had nothing to lose. And a lot of brokers and lenders that felt the same way. So they would let, people who make less than $50,000 a year buy $1 million homes. The numbers did not make sense. All of that is an exaggeration. It's not too much an exaggeration. It's one of the bigger reasons that was available is because there were just too many people who couldn't afford houses. So it could become more viable, but not to the volume, I believe, as it did before. But it's possible. But the other issue is because the banks put deed restrictions, if they do that again, then you're not going to have that pure arbitrage play of where same day or next day get your money back is an option. So who knows?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It looks like Alex has some feedback for us. What's up, Alex?
Yeah, so Chris, I have a question regarding the fix and flip partnership.
Okay.
You're a Florida guy, especially when you started off, you providing the capital and then you have an operating partner. What's the ownership structure on that in terms of percentages?
Okay.
You providing capital?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm gonna say that there's no right or wrong way to do this.
Understand.
Everything is negotiable. But I'm not a huge fan of using cliches, but I might use one in here, and that is the one of the gold makes the rules. And you want to be careful though with that saying, because although that may be true, if you don't look out for your partner's best interests, then eventually if they find somebody who's less expensive or is, they're not going to stick with you. But for me, what worked was that I was 100% owner. And then we would have a specific profit split, when the property was resold. But with and again, totally different ways to do this, but it was more on the lines of a 50-50 profit split. After everything that, I put into it in terms of capital was paid back, and with a specific profit minimum for me. So, and I'll just make up some numbers. So 50-50 profit split, but I have to at least make 25% annualized on my money. Maybe that's one way to do it. And that way it's, I've got to, if you don't put the profit minimum in there, there's no return for you. And it's their job to prove to you what they can do, at least in my mind. For me, it's like, once I come up with the money and pay to purchase the property and help with the rehab money, I've already proven my point that I'm reliable and I can provide the capital. I had the profit minimum because they have to prove that they can do this in a way that is a business and actually makes money. If you see what I'm saying.
Commensurately, then you took all the risk.
Well, yes and no. I mean, for the most part, from a capitalist point of view, yes. But they certainly risked their time and their effort. If in the end,
if that deal then went south, you took all the risk because you own it outright 100%, and then if there was a lender involved, you also were the one that was fronting all of that.
Right.
100%.
And in this case, I provided all the capital. There wasn't a secondary lender as such. Now I've had other deals like where, well, let me evolve on that one first. So that's how I did the first few deals with them. Eventually we went to a structure where it was their entity that purchased, and it was my entity that provided a loan. And frankly, I prefer that structure. And I prefer that structure for a few reasons. One, from a liability standpoint, I don't own the property. So if anybody gets hurt on the property, anything like that, I have no ownership in the property. So I'm protected from a liability standpoint. If the fix and flippers have liability, and let's say they get sued, I now have a mortgage against the property. So that I have to, frankly, get all my capital back, as well as any interest and all that, before any other anybody else can, because the property is leveraged. So that also really protects me. It also allowed me, because I'm not the owner of the property, to use my self-directed 401k with those deals. And this is huge, because now I can do it in an extremely tax efficient manner. All my profits come back to me tax-free. And we can certainly talk more in depth about this, guys. You've certainly heard me talk about this in the past, but I have grown that self-directed 401k, and it's my favorite way to invest, especially in replacement of something that would be taxed at an ordinary income rate. Had I used my lending business that is not, in a self-directed, 401k, I would be paying ordinary income tax on that, as well as payroll tax and all that other stuff. So happy to talk more about self-directed 401ks, but that's how I predominantly invest with these guys in Florida. Did that answer your question there, Alex?
Yes, you did. So in effect, you really become a lender or an investor in your deal structure over time.
Yes. Now, I do want to bring up a good point here, guys, because there's risk here too. And I'll be really frank with you guys. I worked with these guys, they had already done a number of fix and flips. They've already proven to me that they know what they're doing. But I still got to them, within the first 2 years of when they started their business. I could have gone a different direction where, and we all worked really well together. Basically me creating a new business where we were all three partners in the deal. And I would have a lot more leverage in how the business would move forward, what the profit splits are. And because I went over to the lending model within our business, the structure that I have with these guys, when they became really good at what they did, they had relatives, friends, other investors willing to offer them money for less than, frankly, what I was willing to accept. And I don't do all their deals now because of that, because they have capital that's less expensive. So I still do plenty with them. And if I had to do it over again, I don't know that I would change that, because the amount of money that I've saved because I use that model still works out for me in a really, really good way.
And the last
that makes
question,
sense.
Chris, to just let everybody know, you do primarily residential.
Yes.
You're starting to do commercial at
Mhm.
bigger scale, multifamily. But what you have described and shared with everybody are primarily in the residential real estate.
Yeah. I love the idea of multifamily and commercial, but it's not where there's a few reasons I don't, or I have been limited to, although as you said, I am getting into it a bit. I love the idea of having one roof, the economies of scale, but in my experience, most of my experience is in single family. So it's not where I am finding value. And that's for a few different reasons. One is I'm often in the single family market, I'm often competing against people who are buying a primary residence. And look, we can say that there's good things about that and bad, but for me, I'm coming in there and I have the ability to pay with cash. And it just is a huge benefit that I have over a lot of potential buyers. Very often in the commercial space, you are competing against other investors. And that means that you're competing very often against people who are very savvy. So I just haven't seen the returns that you can get, for me personally, in commercial. Not that you say you can't, but me personally, I can get higher returns in the single family side than I can with the commercial. So it's not even necessarily about of how much capital I have or can get to. It's more of which one gives me the better return. And for me personally, it's been single family. Now I am dipping my toe, as you said, into it. And I'm, me and Robert, we bought an old school in just outside of Columbus, Ohio, in Zanesville. You might have heard Robert or talk about this. But basically we bought an old historic school and we're converting it into multifamily. So
wait,
that
is that
is,
the one is that multi-million-dollar conversion?
Yeah.
I just heard that on a podcast like 2 weeks ago.
Hey,
That's
Liz,
cool, Chris. That is a really interesting story.
yeah, it's a great story. So Liz, for what it's worth, Chris, I've enjoyed it. We see each other on a regular basis. I think I know you and Matt more than maybe some of us here. I don't know who else you connect with, but in as much as we see each other and know each other, I've learned something today about Chris, right? That he's also open to the idea, even if it's a non-real estate, but of course he's very particular, he's diligent, and that's very, very clear in how he looks at deals, how he looks at partners, how he looks at the overall scheme of things, right? So he just doesn't go at it hastily. It's got a purpose and it's got a whole criteria, if you will, and it's got to feel right. And so in that way, you're very astute. And we look to you as somebody who's basically gone through the journey. You're on the other end of the spectrum. You know what that looks like. You've paid your dues along the way. Your timing is great. You're in the money side. That's an advantage when you get into a real estate deal or any type of business, when you're coming into a business with capital versus having to have the idea and then you have to figure out a way to bring your idea to fruition. So for what it's worth, I enjoyed the hour with you today, Chris. Liz, just to attest to it, as much as I know Chris, I thought that was a valuable time with him.
Thanks, Alex.
Great.
I appreciate it. I can't believe the hour's gone by that quick. I have a whole outline here and I haven't gone through 10% of it. Happy to look, I'm happy to talk with you guys. Like I said, when I first started in the business, I asked a lot of people for help. And really only one guy gave me the time of day. It's more the reason why I love to give back when I can, because somebody helped me out in the beginning. And look, the selfish reason is that I enjoy it too. I enjoy talking about real estate. I enjoy helping, others, whether they're just beginning or whether they're already involved. And although most of the time when I talk with people, I don't necessarily get a financial benefit from it or a future partner, sometimes I do. So my biggest recommendation to people is constantly, if you like what you're doing, if you like being in real estate, and I guess even if you don't, talk about it a lot, communicate with other people, and make those connections where you can. I mean, every one of my partners I got because I, interacted with other people or people recommended me to other people. And it's not a get rich quick thing with real estate. It's just not. And if you can be methodical and disciplined, you can really make good money. And I think one of the other things I'd really recommend is that and again, this is more my opinion, but I see so much emphasis put on cash flow. And look, that's important. But I think very often, for instance, in the stock market, people are so into dividend investments right now. I don't, if a company gives you a great dividend, that's great. But if it's a shit company and you lose money on the investment, who gives, you're sacrificing your future wealth for current income. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that don't just focus on cash flow, focus on creating and saving money, because the only reason I'm able to do what I was doing is because of delayed gratification. I saved my money and I was able to really be in a good position to negotiate on a lot of deals. That makes sense.
Is there anybody else that would like to give Chris any feedback or quick question? I know we're a few minutes over, but we still have a good bit of people in the room. Anyone else have any comments for Chris or questions?
Thank you, Chris. I mean, he's been, with our group, more than years. At least I joined in this group. Very, very well versed. Always helpful, very open. And I'm really great to know Chris. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Ravi. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hey, I've just got a couple of the really quick things here, guys. Just pieces of advice and things that I've noticed. I see a lot of people who are starting out, and if I'm being really frank, a lot of people that get involved with Royal Legal because they just don't know what structure they should use. And although it can be very helpful to have the right structure from the beginning, I see too many people that put too much emphasis on getting that right structure from the beginning. And my personal advice is figure out how to make money first. Put 90% of your effort into figuring that out. And then the structure to come later, at least in terms of emphasis. Because analysis paralysis, people just get so hung up on that. And then what sacrifices is actually starting the business and making money. You can start as a sole prop. Who cares if it's not the most tax efficient thing in the first year? There's a lot worse things than, paying too much in tax because you were too successful. You can always change the formation of it and, later. So that's important.
I think that's
Don't
really
be-
important because it's a deterrent, right? Everyone, if you're paralyzed for fear of lawsuit for assets that you haven't even yet acquired, right? So
Yeah.
you need to have some, and it's not free to set up these entities, right? And so I think the price tag for if you wanted to get everything done, you know, your whole estate plan, your tax, your entity structure, you know, there's a good price tag towards that. And so, yeah, get money in your pocket, and then you have more money that you can put into your business, and you can always change the way that these things are structured and ownership, et cetera, right? So I think that's a great piece of advice. And Michelle said, I needed to hear that. So great. One more, you got time for one last nugget for us?
I do. And look, I want to kind of give a really broad piece of advice. And it kind of goes like this, guys. You know, we all wake up every morning, and it could be a shitty morning, it can be a good one. But you can, if you train yourself out to, be disciplined enough to choose your attitude about it. And I know that sounds corny, but if you want to be in a bad mood, you're going to be in a bad mood. If you're going to tell yourself, I'm too old, I grew up in a poor family, I have all these other things that are holding against me, and that's why I'm not successful. If you constantly tell yourself that, then that is the way you will live your life for the rest of your life. And this does not discount that we all have challenges, because we all do. I could have a whole webinar on the challenges that I faced in my life. You know, my dad passed away at a very early age. I have partners that I've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars on, that I've been defrauded on. There's a lot of things. So people that may seem very successful, maybe the money didn't just come to them. You know, maybe they worked really hard for it. Maybe they didn't. But just look yourself inward, choose your attitude, and try to move beyond your own programming. My mom is the best mom in the world, and I'm not biased at all. But she's in her 80s, and she's always dependent on other people for some things. And if I'm being really honest, sometimes she says to herself, I'm too old to learn technology, and I just can't do it. And she has that, and I'm trying to train her that is your own choice. That is your own choice to say that, and to constantly reinforce that and say that to yourself. Because when you say those things, it's a feedback, and it's just keeps on happening. And that is what you are in charge of your own destiny. And if you keep telling yourself negative thoughts, then that's what's going to happen. So I'm not saying that therefore you should lie, but maybe a little bit in the beginning, lie to yourself, saying, you know, I can choose my own attitude and only think about, you know, and force yourself to really think in that positive direction.